And welcome back. Well, in our previous video, or the first video in this build series, we covered a little bit about what the machine shop did. We got our remain seal installed, and we put the limiter in our phaser that we're going to need for the cam. And again, the reason for that limiter is because we're going with a larger cam, and we need to limit the number of degrees that the phaser can affect the VVT timing, because again, we don't want our valves to mash into our pistons. So with that being done, the remain seal being on, let's go ahead and go into the next step of this, which is what we can do is work on getting all the front timing components on, because obviously they have to be there before we can put the front timing cover on. And then we need to get the timing cover on before we can do the oil pan and the windage tray. So let's go ahead and concentrate on that piece of it. And the first thing I'm going to do, as I commented in the previous video, is that even though I know this cam has been lubed, what I like to do, and again, it's just for my method of double checking. And again, it's nothing against the machine shop, nothing against anyone did or didn't do. Again, it's just for my use, and it's always good to double check things. Is I'm going to pull this cam out of here. We're going to thoroughly coat it in some Permatex assembly lube, and then we're just going to put the cam back into the motor. And the way I like to do this is to, there's various different ways you can do it. This is just an old cam bolt, which you see a lot of people do, and you can thread in an old cam bolt like this, kind of use it like a handle and help pull the cam out, and just being careful that you don't jam one of the cam lobes into the surface of one of your cam bearings. Now there's also handles that you can get that will basically come out to a little apparatus that just bolts in using a cam bolt. But what I like to do is take a phaser, an old one or a new one. In this case, we'll just use the old one that came off the engine. Now, this isn't the one we modified, but it'll work for what we need. And go ahead and just put this phaser on the engine block with an old cam bolt. Again, we're just going to go hand tight. No need to put full torque on this. And this gives you a nice, big, solid surface you can grab a hold of to give you plenty of support to help get this cam out. So that's what I'm going to work on. So let me get this situated, and then when we get it situated, I'll bring you back for the next piece of this. Again, I'm just trying to cut out the viewpoints of you watching me thread in and thread out bolts. Try to cut down on the time a little bit. So let me get this phaser installed, and I'll bring you right back. One moment. And then again, in case you're curious, you've got your alignment pin on your phaser. That's going to go on the alignment pin of your cam. You'll feel it drop in place right there. And then we can, again, just put our bolt in hand tight. So let me go ahead and work on this, and I'll bring you right back. One moment. And welcome back. So again, we got our bolt in here with our old phaser. Again, just hand tight. I literally didn't even use a ratchet. I just used the 18mm socket and just got it as basically hand tight as I could with my fingers. And that's really about all that we need here. Now, what I like to do to remove these cams to start is just kind of get them rocking from side to side a little bit like that. Pull it forward, and there we go. As you can see, we're already out. And you just be gentle with it, because you don't want to run one of those lobes into one of those bearing surfaces, and you kind of just have to feel your way as each one of these cam journals clears a bearing. Just nice and easy. And there we go. And we're out. Perfect. And it's actually probably a good thing that we did. You can see there, what I just pulled off of that was a little bit of silicone on the end of our cam. And you can see there's more on the end of the cam itself. And where this is coming from, I'm sorry, you're out of view there, is that on a Hemi, the rear cam bearing on the back of the motor here is held in place literally with just silicone. It's just a silicone seal. There's a metal bearing cap back there, but it's held in place with just silicone. So probably what had happened was when they put that rear cam bearing in, a little bit kind of splitzed its way out into here, got on the end of the cam. Like I said, no harm, no foul. But it is one of the reasons why it's a good idea to kind of double check on the work. So what I'm going to do is just clean up the end of this with a nice soft cloth. And then what we'll do is we'll get everything thoroughly lubed down with our Permatex lube, and we'll get everything reinstalled here. So let me go ahead and take care of that, and I'll be right back. And welcome back. So just going to show you, it's a little Permatex Ultra Slick engine assembly lube. And it's just going to be a matter of kind of putting syrup on pancakes, in my opinion. And yes, I'm going to use a lot, probably too much, but I don't care. Especially once we get it on here, just a matter of working it into the lobes and all around the cam. I would rather have a bit too much on this occasion than not enough. And again, this was thoroughly lubricated from the machine shop. I'm not saying they didn't do it. I'm just adding some extra because I want to make sure, in the event this takes a little while longer to complete before we can do the install and the startup, that we're thoroughly protected. Okay, now that we've got everything nice and lubed, and I did take a flashlight and look down the cam bore. Everything there looks good. We're going to insert this just like when we removed it. We're just going to be careful and kind of feel our way through. Try to keep off the surfaces of our bearings. Okay, just getting that final one back there to line up. There it goes. Had to pick up a little bit on the cam. But there you go. Perfect. You can see that slid right on in. Very little effort. And yes, that cam is heavy. And holding it in front of the camera is a bit awkward, so hopefully I got everything in the shot. So what I like to do, that cam spins nice and free. Very little effort, hand force to spin it, which is what I'm looking for. Now the next thing we're going to do, I'm going to get these nasty gloves off, and we're going to put the thrust plate on. We're going to put the cam phaser back on here, and then we're going to spin it, because once the thrust plate is on here and torqued down, we want to make sure that the thrust plate is not pinching the cam, because if the cam is not seated far enough back for various reasons, and this cam is touching the thrust plate, well, that's obviously a bad thing, because there is a amount of play that should be between the cam and the thrust plate. So short way of saying it, when we put the thrust plate on here and get it torqued, we should be able to spin this cam as free and easy as we are now. So let me get this gloves cleaned up here, get on a fresh pair, and we're going to take our phaser off. And then we're going to put the thrust plate on. So one moment. Before I take the phaser off of here, I forgot to mention this. I apologize, but I want to make note of this. Is the other reason why I like to use a phaser to especially put the cam in is that this phaser will stop you from going too far forward with your cam versus if you're just holding on to a bolt or a cam handle, you don't want to go too far in because this cam will let you do that. And again, that rear bearing for that cam is only held in with the rear of this engine by silicone. So if you inadvertently stab it in too far, you might unseat that rear cam cap. Again, which is why I like using the phaser, because it'll physically stop you from going too far in. So back to this. Well, I'll tell you what. I'll leave you there. Leave you running a little bit. We'll just set this off to the side. And then I will get out just wiping off some excess smudge. Now, this channel here has got oil channels that run through it on the back on this section here. So this thrust plate you're going to see is going to cover up this area, but this is an oil channel that runs behind that. Okay, and of course we're going to get out our bag of parts when we took everything apart. What I'm going to do, I'll do this off camera, but I'm just going to clean the thrust plate up here that you see here. Get out the bolts for the thrust plate, get them nice and clean. And then what we're going to do is we'll take the surface that touches the cam, which is this surface here. This thrust plate only goes on one way because this got the conical or concave holes, so the mounting hardware will lay flat. So this side is the side that touches the cam. We'll coat it down with some assembly lube. We'll get the bolts in, get them torqued, and then we'll spin our cam and make sure we're not binding against anything. And I will be using some Loctite on all of this, all of the timing hardware to include this thrust plate as we get everything reassembled. The book, if I remember correctly, I'll look at this, I'll verify this, but I don't think the book necessarily covers that and says that you need to. But I have seen bolts on other individuals' videos that led to timing chain failure. Not timing chain failure, but timing failure, where bolts for the guide or something happen to work themselves loose and come out. And of course, once you get enough slack on the timing chain, you're going to run into obvious issues. So again, that's the reason why we'll just be using a little bit of blue Loctite with all of our timing hardware. Again, just to give us that extra level of protection. But let me get to work on cleaning this stuff up, and I'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. So I got a thrust plate cleaned up with all the old oil. I did put some assembly lube on the back of that thrust plate. Not that I think it's completely necessary to do. Book doesn't say it, but on the back of this old thrust plate, you can see areas here where the old camshaft did make contact with it. And that's normal. There is a little bit of end play. There is a specified amount of end play between the cam and the thrust plate. And again, this thrust plate goes on one way. Those little concave areas are there for the mounting screws here, which are, I believe these are called conical screws. See that little bit of head on them? And they'll sit down inside these chamfered screw holes and basically just set flat with the plate. And the reason for that would be, obviously you saw us with the cam phaser on here earlier, and obviously if those bolts weren't flat, the cam phaser wouldn't have the clearance to be able to spin, or your cam wouldn't have the clearance to be able to spin, I should say. I'll show you the paperwork here. That's your torque pattern that's your torque pattern per all data. And those bolts get tightened up to 9 foot-pounds. And that reminds me, I forgot to put the Loctite on these. So before we tighten them up, back these out, put a little drop of Loctite on them. Now obviously if something is wrong with the depth of the cam and we bind, we'll have to take the bolts out, but no harm, no foul. We can take them out and clean them up. Okay, again, just a little drop of Loctite, blue Loctite, a little dab will do you, so to speak, not too terrible much, but I'm going to continue that. I'm going to get these on here. I'm going to get them torqued to, looks like they list, I believe I said it earlier, yeah, 9 foot-pounds. I'm going to torque to 9 foot-pounds, and I'll bring you right back. One moment. And welcome back. You can see that we got our thrust plate in. It has been torqued. And we just got our temporary phaser on here that we had earlier along with our old bolt. But as you can see, we can come in here and we can turn this really, really easily. Pretty much by hand, almost no effort at all. Which is nice because it tells me that we're not binding against our thrust plate. Now there is a measurement of back and forth movement, or I should say forward and back movement on this cam, and I don't have that chart with me, but I will look that up and probably add a comment to the top of this video, or at least what all data says the thrust end plate should be, or the clear tolerances should be. Yeah, end plate tolerance. That's the word I was looking for. So we got it in there. We got everything torqued at 9 foot-pounds. We double checked it. We're not binding. We can still turn it really, really smooth. And obviously, if you're not within your thrust plate specs, they just want you to take apart, disassemble, clean it. And if you're too far out, then you may have to replace this thrust plate. I haven't had to replace a thrust plate yet, but it is possible. So what we're going to do next is we're going to get this, again, old phaser off, and we're going to get the new phaser on. Now, I'm going to continue to use an old bolt just to kind of hold things in place and get everything in alignment. And then when we finally get all the timing gear on here and oil pump and such, and we have the timing chain under tension that you'll see here in a bit, once a timing chain's under tension, it does a pretty good job of holding the phaser in place. And then once we're ready for final torque, then we'll put a new cam bolt in and get it torqued down to spec. And well, I'll cover this again when we get to it, but it's 72 foot-pounds for this phaser bolt. Because one thing to keep in mind, I'll mention this again when we get to it, is that pin on that cam, that's just a guide pin. It's just an alignment pin. This phaser stays stuck to this cam strictly by its clamping force of that bolt, which again, yes, we will be Loctiting this bolt as well, again, for that extra bit of insurance. So if something happens where this bolt loosens up or comes out, then obviously, you know, you're going to lose your phaser along with it. Because I have seen various reports on the internet of individuals posting pictures of having sheared pins on their cams. And the only way I can think that would happen is that obviously something happened with engine rotation. It could have potentially been caused by this bolt loosening up and everything still spinning, and then basically all the force of being transferred from the crank on the timing chain, rather than it being transferred by the clamping force, somehow gets transferred over to that lonely little guide pin, which obviously can't tolerate that amount of torque, and it ends up shearing that pin off. So something happens in the running process of that. One other thing that I could think that could possibly do that, and I'm just spitballing here again, I'm not an engine builder, so engine builders please chime in, is if, just like when we looked here, when we put that phaser back on after having this thrust plate installed and just verifying that we were spinning free, you know, if you've got a binding situation there, or you forget to check it for one reason or another and it's got some excess drag, now that might potentially cause you some issues as well. Either way, well, now that we got that taken care of, let me go get the actual phaser, the one we modified yesterday with the limiter, timing chain guide, the tensioner, and of course the oil pump. And then we'll work on getting all of that on here. So we need to get our timing gear on lower here, our guide, our tensioner, and of course the cam that phaser and actual chain that we're going to use. So let me go get some parts together and I'll bring you right back. And welcome back. So continuing on with getting our timing components on the front of our engine here. And first thing I'm going to do is just got a hold of a silver Sharpie. And let me run some part numbers past you first. But again, as I said before, when I show you part numbers, kind of take them with a grain of salt. Even though you may also be working on a 5.7 Hemi, just verify the part numbers will also work for your particular application. It's always good to double check part numbers. That's our timing chain guide. Our timing chain tensioner. We picked up a newer, lower timing sprocket. And of course the timing chain. And I'll show you the part number for the phaser again. I think we looked at this yesterday, but I'll show it to you again just so that they're all here. There we go. And first thing I'm going to do is take both the lower timing gear and the phaser. I'm going to highlight the timing marks on them with a silver Sharpie. It shows up a lot better. And let me find it first here on the gear. So this is the lower timing sprocket. And you'll may be able to see a little bit of a divot right there on that tooth. That is our timing mark. But if I take a Sharpie, I like using the silver ones, and just take and paint that particular tooth all silver, that timing mark shows up a lot better. We're going to do the same thing to the phaser. And the timing mark on the phaser is going to be on the inside lip here. I just need to find it. It's hard to do with this shield in place because I kind of bury it. There it is. Okay, so let me get this. It's going to be hard for you to possibly see that, but you'll see on that one tooth behind it, it has kind of like a little indented oval. Let me color that in with a Sharpie, and then I'll show you what it looks like. Okay. And now, with it colored in, you'll see that little indented area right behind that tooth. That is your timing mark on your phaser. And on your chain, you got a couple of links, about 3 links in total, if I recall correctly, that are marked. So on your chain, you've got your 2 links with kind of orange rectangles side by side. And then you have a 3rd link with another orange rectangle down here at the bottom. This goes on your top, your 2, and your single one goes on the lower timing gear. And when we get all this set up, I'll bring you back before we put the oil pump in place so you can kind of see where we're going with this. Okay. I'm just looking over. Of course, when if you, I don't, all data does this, but if you print the instructions out on here, there's a bunch of warnings about not turning the cam or the crank a few degrees out from each other. And what that is that if you had this engine, you know, still installed in the engine bay, and maybe you're just doing a timing chain job, well, the heads are still installed, lifters, push rods, and if you turn things too far out of whack, depending on where the position is with the cam, and you turn the crank too far, you could run a piston into a valve. So that's what they're trying to tell you to be careful of in case you're doing this on an engine that's already assembled, as far as the, you know, cylinder heads and such. So hopefully you can see that there. So that top timing mark on that phaser is going to go in between the 2 orange rectangles on those 2 links. Your bottom one is going to be, that dot is going to line right up with that link. And one thing I like to kind of point out here is, and I'll show you this once we get the chain on here, is that I've seen a lot of videos out there, and they're correct in the sense that the top timing mark is going to point straight up, and the bottom one they say should be pointing at 6 o'clock. Well, on the Hemi, on the 5.7 Hemis and the 6 to 6.4 that I've dealt with, that's not necessarily the case. You're going to find the lower timing mark is more at the 5 o'clock position, not the 6 o'clock position. So just kind of keep mindful of that, because that tripped me up when we were doing the cam job on the 6.4, because it's the first time I had timed a Hemi, and all the videos I could find online were saying that the bottom one should be pointed at 6 o'clock. And you'll never be able to get that bottom one pointed straight down at 6 o'clock and then get all your timing marks to match up. And we know that we're in correct time because all the marks match all the links in the chain. So we know having this bottom crank at 5 o'clock, 1 through experience, and 2 because we got everything lined up, we know it's correct. I guess what I'm trying to say for is just kind of keep that in the back of your brain, and you can even see it on this diagram here. You notice they have this kind of more, maybe more to kind of like 5.30ish position. It's not pointing straight down. So let's do this. Let me get the phaser and everything on there. And again, we're just going to go hand tight with an old bolt for now. We'll come back and replace the bolt later. And then we'll go from here. So trying to show a little bit more of the actual mechanical parts of this, rather than what I would typically do is, you know, kind of jump cut some of this stuff out because it's just repetitive. But in case you haven't seen this before, again, it is an interference engine, so, wrong bolt. Where is my old crank bolt? I'm sorry, not crank bolt, but cam bolt. There it is. That's what happens. You're not paying attention. And what I'm doing here on the phaser is I'm just lining it up with the alignment pin, the alignment dial pin on the cam, and you'll know when you're in there because like that right there, you could obviously, when you got this in your hand, you could tell it's not seated. if we rotate it, it'll fall right into place once you're on that alignment dowel. Of course, we're just going to put this in hand tight. It's just an old bolt or used bolt. We'll replace this with a final bolt when we get to the step of the final torque. Again, I'm just using the socket, just using my fingers. There's no sense in going any tighter than that. Now I'll take this cam per the instructions and I'll put that straight up, pretty much in line with the hole here. I'll tell you what, let me pause you. Let me get you swung more to be towards the front of the engine so you can get a better view on this, and I'll bring you right back. And welcome back. So as you can see, we've got our phaser on here with our temporary bolt. We went ahead and put our lower cam gear on. Remember, we marked our timing marks with a silver Sharpie on our phaser and our lower cam gear. And we're just starting to get everything situated with the timing chain. Now, I'll show you all this in a bit, as far as all the part numbers, once we get this finished here. But just started kind of putting the guide into position, and the tensioner will eventually sit over here. But just getting everything lined up as far as the timing marks. You can see, and I'll bring you in and show you this, the lower one here in a bit. But we've got our upper timing mark facing up on our cam, and it's in between the two links with the orange rectangles on it where it needs to be, pointing straight up. And this is what I may have mentioned earlier, is that when you have everything in time, your lower sprocket is close to being straight up and down, but it's more of a 530-ish position. And I'll show you that here in a moment. But one other thing to look at is that when we know we have our crank in the right position, we'll have our number one cylinder, which is this one here, which is in top dead center. As you can see, it's up on its TDC at this point. So that way we know we got our cam in the right position as far as where it's at. Remember, this lower sprocket is keyed to the crank, so it's only going to go on one way. And as long as you've got that timing tooth lined up with the right timing mark in the chain, then you're where you need to be. You don't have to worry about, this wandering and, not being in the right spot, as long as you line that timing mark up. And that's a good way to verify it. You just look at the position of your number one cylinder and you can see that it's coming up. So you're either up on intake or up on the exhaust stroke at that point. But with our timing mark where we need it to be, we see our number one cylinder's up. We got our mark for our phaser in between our two timing marks on top of the chain. And I'll get you out of the tripod here in a second and zoom in a little bit more on this chain so that you can see that. Let me do that. Let me take it out of the tripod. We'll cover that, and then we'll get our guide and our tensioner in. As far as getting this chain on without the guide and the tensioner, you've got enough slack. You can kind of feed it in as one piece. In other words, get your lower sprocket in place, put your lower timing chain, or kind of loop it around the bottom of the sprocket. You don't necessarily have to line it up yet, but you've got enough slack you can kind of jimmy it and get the top where it needs to be. But there's enough slack, and I'll show you here when we look down here at the camera, that you can actually turn this, and the chain will has just enough room to bypass the lower teeth on the lower pulley, so you can kind of get that one lined up where it needs to be as well. And it may be easier for you, and I've seen individuals do this, where they'll take the phaser and the lower cam, get it situated in the chain where it needs to be, and kind of slide everything on as one assembly. It really just kind of comes down to preference. But let me get you out of the tripod and show you this. One moment. And welcome back. So I'm just kind of get you in as close as I can get you. Hopefully we're in focus. A little bit of shop light off to the side so you can see that. But you can see where we colored in with the silver Sharpie our lower timing mark, our dot. So we colored in that entire tooth silver. And you can see on this link of chain here, there's an orange rectangle. That's what we're plugged into and lined up with. Now on this particular chain, I also noticed this. There's a part number mark here. Don't let that confuse you. That's not the mark you want for the lower one. You want, in this case, this is an OEM chain. It's designated by an orange rectangle there. And you can see our top sprocket that we're in pretty much kind of the 12 o'clock position, but you can see our timing mark that we colored in with the Sharpie is in between our two links with our two orange rectangles up top. And that's what we're more or less going for. And you can see there's enough slack that the lower chain without the guide or the tensioner in there doesn't necessarily catch all the way in. So it gives you a little bit of wiggle room that you can kind of finagle this to get everything that you need in place. Once you put that guide and that tensioner in there, even with the pin not pulled in the tensioner, it eats up enough of the slack. It kind of makes it hard to adjust. So what I'm going to do next is finish putting the bolts in for the guide. You can see the guide here. You can see the direction it goes in, the little point down towards the bottom. I'll put you back in the tripod and bring you that, and we'll slam some bolts in here just so you can see that portion of it. I will Loctite each one of these. I have seen occasion before where other individuals have posted that these bolts have backed out on them. And of course, if you back out and lose either your guide or your tensioner, you can see there's going to be enough slack in your chain that you could easily jump time at that point. And of course, valves will kiss pistons, which are, obviously give you a bad day. So let me get you back on the tripod and I'll bring you right back. One moment. And welcome back. So I got you not zoomed in, but pretty close to the motor at this point. And we're just gonna, again, finish putting this in. I had this kind of just hanging here by a bolt, just to kind of hold it in position, but I'm going to go ahead and take this other bolt out so we can get some Loctite on it. Yes, truth be known, I did shoot this scene a couple of times. There were a couple of versions of doing this that I didn't like. So I ended up redoing this a couple of times and hopefully trying to make a little bit better sense out of things. Okay, so little point on the bottom, big point on the top. And this is going to kind of slide in here like this and bolt up. I get some Loctite on a bolt here and we can work on getting the first one in. Yes, I know, riveting entertainment, watching the bolts go into a piece of hardware. Sorry, I've got my hand in your view there. Again, just a little bit of blue Loctite, just as an extra added safety measure. I mean, yeah, the book doesn't say to use blue Loctite on these, but because I have seen it on individuals where those bolts have backed themselves out, it's just going to give us a little extra warm and fuzzy. And like I said, I'll show you these part numbers here in a moment. These is all OEM timing components, because I was able to get OEM timing components. Nothing against the aftermarket. If I couldn't get the OEM ones, I would definitely get them from an aftermarket. If you remember, we were originally going to go aftermarket on this build, because with supply shortages being what they were, we couldn't get what we were looking for. You see, I had to put a little bit of pressure on that to get that to push forward, because we're eating up the slack in that chain. But going back, we couldn't originally get a lot of OEM parts earlier this year And we were prepping to do all of this, so we ended up getting an aftermarket set, but then the OEM ones became available. So we kind of ended up just going reordering for that. And I'm just going to go hand tight on here, nothing crazy. And then we'll come back here in a short and torque all this up. But what I'm looking at here is just making sure that our lower gear is on its timing mark, and it is. We're still in the correct length of the chain. And on our upper, we're still pointing straight up, and we're in between the two orange links that we need there. So just to show that to you, you can see there. And then let me lower you and get you to where you can verify the bottom one. And I may have to pull you out. So yeah, let me pause you, pull you out, and we'll verify the bottom one, because I can't get you, well, I might be able to. Let me see if I can get the tripod a bit lower. A little bit of live action here. There we go. And hopefully you can see that there, that we've got our timing dot right on our link that it should be on. So good. We're in time at this point. We verified it. We just need to get our items torqued, or bolts torqued, I should say. And but as you can see, even with it being hand tight, it does eat up enough slack in this chain that if you had either one of these two in place, that it would make it extremely difficult to get that chain on in the first place. So let me get a torque wrench, get these torqued down, and I'll bring you right back. One moment. And welcome back. So we got everything torqued at this point. The manual, or at least for all data, the chart is listing, let's find them here, 97 inch-pounds for both the guide and the tensioner bolts. That translated or converted over to roughly 8.08 foot-pounds. So they've all been torqued. All 4 bolts have been torqued to 8 foot-pounds at this point. And just for safety's sake and paranoia's sake, yes, that is lined up with its marks, and the lower one is still lined up with its marks. Yep, dot on the triangle and the timing mark up top between the two orange rectangles. Perfect. Okay, so the next piece that we have to put on, that we can go ahead and put on, would be our oil pump, because obviously it needs to be there before we can do the oil pan and the pickup tube and things of that nature. And as I commented in the previous video, what we're going to use is a Melling high volume pump. And what I'll do, oh, I'm sorry, I promised, let's do this first. I did promise I would show you these if I haven't already. Now, this was the part number for the tensioner that we used. And this would have been the chain, or is the part number for the chain. And this is the part number for the lower sprocket. And just to go ahead and show, I know I showed you this yesterday, but just to go, I'm sorry, and the guide. Let's do that one next. Part number for the timing chain guide. And I know I showed it to you yesterday, but just to go ahead and cap it all off, this is the part number once again for the phaser. Now, you may not need, a phaser or a lower gear when you're doing the timing like this. Obviously, if they're still in good shape, they're perfectly good to reuse. The nice thing about, I shouldn't say nice thing. The reason why we're just doing new here is because we're doing as much new as we can onto this block, considering we are supercharging it. And it was just it was one of those while you're here type moments. If we're going to have it tore down this far, to do a new chain, a new guide and a tensioner, you know, might as well at least throw a new lower sprocket and a newer phaser into the mix. Now, the lower sprocket isn't too bad cost-wise, but I will tell you that an actual OEM phaser is not inexpensive. So you may want to reuse that. And I've reused these before. They've been fine. The 2500 we did when we did the cam in it, I actually just put the phase limiter in the existing cam. And it was fine. The 2009 rebuild that we did last year on this channel, I reused the phaser. In this one, the only reason why I went with a new phaser is just because. We could have very easily just modified the old phaser and used it. So just for transparency for you. So let me get you out of the stand, and I will show you a little bit more as far as the contents of this Melling oil pump box, and I'll bring you right back. 1 moment. And welcome back. So you can see that we got our Melling oil pump here, and to give credit where credit is due, there's your part number there. I discovered this part number from watching Reignited's videos. He's been doing a lot of research and looking into potential causes for the Hemi tick, and increasing the oil flow, especially at idle, is one of the items that he has been looking into. And it's the reason why on this channel we also started to use the quote-unquote Hellcat oil pumps, which are, again, they're not necessarily quote-unquote Hellcat. They're just oil pumps out of a 6.2 liter supercharged Hemi. AKA, that's what the Hellcat uses, is a 6.2 liter supercharged engine. So that Hellcat oil pump has a higher flow rate of, and his video, he has the percentages, but it's X number of percentage, it's like 10 something ish percent over a stock 5.7 Hemi, standard Hemi oil pump. So we use them because we get better flow. Better flow means results to higher oil pressure, and we get more oil up at the top end where the lifters and stuff are, especially when we're at idle. Well, recently he showed this one in his video, and Melling has had a high volume oil pump for the previous generations of Hemis, but not until recently have they come up with one that fits this gen of a type of Hemi. And this one actually has a 20-something-ish percent higher flow rate than a standard 5.7 stock oil pump. So this has a higher flow rate than even what a Hellcat oil, a quote-unquote Hellcat oil pump is rated for. So we're going to have a higher flow, which is going to translate into being a higher oil pressure within the motor, but more importantly, more lubrication on the top end, especially when we're sitting at idle. And since we're in here and we're doing the work, no better time to, you know, definitely put a new oil pump on it. I would do a new oil pump regardless because it's a new engine build, but no better opportunity to slam a nice high volume oil pump on there and kind of give this one a shot. I mean, yeah, we're kind of going into this one admittedly a little bit blind, but Melling makes good components. No issue with any of their stuff thus far. So it'll be interesting to get this one in there and actually kind of see what our pressures are going to be when we're cold at idle, when we're running hot, when we're hot at idle, you know, things of that nature. And keep an eye on Reignited's channel as well, because I know he plans on testing this pump in comparison to the other pumps on his project vehicle as well. So with that being said, we're going to get this pump out of here. And you'll see that it does come with a relief spring and instructions. And what this does is, you see, it lowers the oil pressure a little bit by putting this blue spring in. And watching Reignited's video, where you would potentially want to remove the oil pressure spring from that area of the pump there and replace it with the blue one, is if you're going to keep the stock MDS system in place. Because what will happen is you're potentially going to throw some codes if you have the stock MDS system in place and you're not going to disable it. Just due to the changes in oil pressure, it kind of throws the ECU for a loop. It thinks there's a problem when it thinks there's a problem based on its checks when it's not technically a problem. But we're deleting the MDS system on this motor completely, so we don't need to change out to this slightly lower pressure spring. So we'll just leave that in the box. And they did give us a new O-ring for our pickup tube, which we'll use their O-ring since it's going to be used with their pump. Yeah, high pressure, if a lower pressure approximately, you can see it decreases. The number 8 to 10 is desired. Yeah, remove the spring and change it. Remove the white spring that's in here and change that with the other one. Now you can see they even make the note here that changing that release spring does not change the low idle pressure. So if you're going to keep the stock MDS system, you can change out this spring, which should alleviate you getting the code, but it looks like you still maintain the benefits of the increased oil pressure at idle, again, which is what we're looking for. So with that being said, on a little bit of a soapbox there, let's go ahead and get this on the front of the motor and get it torqued. Now you see they say 354 inch-pounds. So what I'll do, I'm just gonna, for the plug, that is the valve plug torque. So if you're going to change that spring out, that's your torque value for it. As far as the torque value for the bolts, I'll just pull that out of the factory specs and use the same torque value to the block bolts that it would be even if it was a factory pump. So let me get you back on the tripod. We'll get this set up and we'll see if we can get this in place. One moment. And welcome back. So got you back on the tripod, zoomed into the front here. Now, we're not done with the timing yet. I just want to point that out. Remember, we haven't pulled our pin yet to apply our tension to our chain. So you want to be careful if you move the crank. Now, there's enough slack taken up in the chain that it should hold itself together and keep everything moving as one. But just be careful until you remove, that pin right there and apply tension to it. If you crank on this too much, there is a slight possibility that you could jump a tooth and not notice it. So before we put this oil pump in place, because it does make it kind of hard to see this lower timing mark, I have looked at it about half a dozen times just out of paranoia to make sure that we still have the right dot, which we do, on the right tooth, which we do, before we encase this. Because what happens is, if you're not familiar with these, is that you have these flats and spots in it. It's basically, it's a gear. And what's going to happen is the oil pump, whether it be factory or aftermarket, doesn't matter, is going to spline into the lower crank gear. So you may have to kind of turn the gear on the inside of the pump housing a little bit just to kind of get it to line up. And there we go. We're starting to line up there, which is good. Okay. Now, there's no gasket on this. It's a metal to metal seal, which I wanted to verify. Oh yeah, I'm glad I did that. I want to look at that. I want to do that. This is your oil port. So this is where it's going to put oil into the block, but you can see we got a little paint overspray on here. So what I want to do first is just clean this edge up here and get this paint overspray off, because again, this is a metal to metal seal. I don't want something in there that's potentially going to cause that to leak. So let me do that. Let me pause you just so you're not watching me clean up that end of the block, and I'll bring you right back. One moment. And welcome back. So you can see we've got that area there cleaned up and prepped. I'm just going to slide our oil pump back on. We're going to get our teeth to match back up with our timing gear. See if we can get this to slide back in place like we had it. Yeah, like I said, sometimes you kind of have to just rotate this a little bit to get it to line up and fall into place. Yeah, hold on. easier. I'm sorry, I'm working on reaching around the camera to spin this gear. There we go. That's what we're looking for. Okay, now, if this is anything like the factory pumps, normally you got to push on it a little bit more to kind of get it to click into place. It'll be interesting to see if this one does the same thing. As you can kind of see, there's a little bit of a gap there still where those bosses are at that bolt through. So if we take this and give it a little bit of pressure, there we go. Perfect. So that gets it to seat the rest of the way onto the lower timing gear. And let's see. Let's get our bolts prepped. Yes, and once again, I'm going to put a little bit of Loctite on this, as we have been doing. It doesn't say to do it in the book, but it's more for that nice little sake of insurance. What I am looking for is the spec. Yes, I know, I'm sorry, I'm rambling. You know, welcome to my world. When I'm doing these videos, I don't really have what I'm going to say scripted out. Let's see, okay, it says 21 foot-pounds. It's weird. These all data instructions are kind of odd at times. Sometimes they'll give you the torque specification like it does there as part of the install procedures, and other times it tells you to reference the torque chart to get what that torque specification should be. It's 21 foot-pounds. So what I'm going to do is, again, I'm going to get our bolts cleaned up, get them nice and dry, put a little bit of Loctite, blue Loctite on there, get them in and get them torqued, and I'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. So we got our bolts in for our oil pump. We've got them torqued. And yes, just out of paranoia, I did check that bottom timing mark yet once again, because as you can see, when you got the, let me pan you down here, when you got the oil pump in here, it's, you kind of have to get a bore scope in here in order to kind of see that timing mark with that oil pump in the place. But what we're going to do is go ahead and we're going to pull the pin on our timing chain. Since everything's right, we verified our marks again, we got everything in place. We're going to put some tension on the chain, which will allow us to take this temporary bolt out of this phaser and allow us to put the new bolt in its place. And that part number, in case you're curious, it's right there. It is 06102430 alpha alpha. But once again, please verify, you know, these part numbers, that they actually fit your application before you go down that route. Let's see. There it is. So what we should be able to do, now that we've got everything in and torqued, you can see this, we're just going to pull the pin on our tensioner. There we go. Now you'll see that the phaser did move a little bit, but it's just because it's applying tension to the chain and kind of taking up that slack. So now going forward, if we put a crank bolt in here and have to turn this over for any reason, then we know that the cam and the crank will be kept in sync with each other. But with that tension being on that chain, typically you can kind of reach over here and take this phaser bolt out. And normally, the tension on the chain will do a good job of keeping that phaser held in place for you, keeping it from falling forward. I'm just getting a new bolt ready behind the scenes here. Just comparing old to new, and yep, that is the same bolt, or the same type of bolt. Again, just going with a little bit of blue Loctite on this. A little bit on it. Not going too overboard with it. And then I'll just get it hand tight, and I'll come in here and finish it off with a torque wrench. And sometimes I've been able to torque these. Usually when you start to torque them, it'll start to turn the engine over. Normally if you just I find if I got a decent glove on, I can kind of hold the phaser and keep it from turning over the motor. There we go. There we go. We are now kind of hand tight. Now I can set up the torque wrench and torque that down to its listed spec, which I think I may have set it before, but just to say it again. So this is camshaft phaser bolt, 72 foot-pounds. So let me get set up to do that. I'll go ahead and get this torqued, and then I'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. So we got our bolt in, Loctited and torqued to 72 foot-pounds. I hit it a couple of times just to verify that we were. So I hit it at 72, waited a few moments, hit it again just to basically hit it about 3 times in a row to make sure we were at correct torque. And to show you what I had to do, because I couldn't quite hold it well enough by hand, I just threaded in 2 of the old flex plate bolts. And that in conjunction with a small pry bar that you see here, literally did something like this, and just kind of wedged in, basically using the bolts, the pry bar, and the frame, wedge it in just to keep the motor from turning, so that way we could get to the final 72 foot-pounds on that. Oops, sorry, I know I'm bouncing around a little bit because I'm trying to move a tripod around. So what I'm thinking that we're going to do, oh no, sorry, I want to show you this as well. I did rotate the engine over using the crank bolt a couple of times, and to verify that we're still in time, because now that I've turned it over a couple of times, plus it moved a little bit while we were tightening that bolt up, which is why we wanted to make sure we had tension on the chain first so we didn't inadvertently jump a tooth while we're moving this around, tightening this up, is that I just did a couple of revolutions on it and then brought the top cam straight up again as far as its timing mark. And you can see where our number 1 piston's at. It is up to the top where we expect it to be. So that tells me that we're still in time as far as the cam and the crank. So we didn't jump anything or slip anything while in the process of tightening that up. And yeah, I know it's a little bit paranoid to keep going back and checking that timing again and again and again. It eats up a little bit of a time, but I'd rather fix it while we're here before we get it back inside the truck and go to start it up and find out that we've got an even bigger issue now. Okay, as far as next steps, this video is getting a little bit long, but I think what I'm going to do to finish up this video is that we're going to rotate the engine around, and I've got to make sure I've got the RTV. Let me make sure that first, and then we'll see about getting the oil pan and the windage tray, at least get the lower end, the pickup tube and the oil pickup tube, basically get the lower end of this block taken care of, and then we'll cut it at a video at that point, and then we'll come back in a different video, and we'll put the lifters in, the MDS block off plugs, we'll put the heads in. The head gaskets did come in, by the way, the 10,000 sticker mall head gaskets, and I'll show you those here in a subsequent video. But let me get you repositioned. Let's get this block turned over onto its belly, and I'll bring you right back. One moment. And welcome back, everybody. I did check. Unfortunately, I do not have the RTV sealant needed for us to finish putting the windage tray and the oil pan on. The other item we need to take care of is doing the front timing cover, but you know, no harm, no foul there. We have what we need, and considering we still have to put the front timing cover on, as well as button up the bottom. With this being Christmas Day, I'm not going to find a store open that I can get some RTV from. That will have to wait until tomorrow. So I think this will be a good stopping point for this video. And then when I bring you back, we'll finish up with the front timing cover, all the items on the bottom, and we'll also potentially put the lifters in as well, since that's pretty straightforward, and the MDS block off plug. So we'll call it at least maybe a timing components video at this point, and we'll bring you back to finish this up. Unfortunately, it will have to be in another video, just again, just due to the nature of the holidays. Speaking of the holidays, whichever you may celebrate, happy holidays one and all to everybody who has subscribed so far. Thank you immensely. If you have not, please consider doing so. I don't think this will be the last video for this year, because as soon as I can get that sealant, I'll jump on this tomorrow and do some additional filming. We should be able to get one, maybe two more videos out. So again, if you have subscribed, thank you immensely. If you haven't, please consider doing so. Hopefully these videos are of use to you and the projects you may be looking at doing. And once again, happy holidays one and all, and I'll bring you back tomorrow, and we'll march on. And with that being said, thank you much. Bye.